Afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry you were all subjected to my CV at such length. And I've really got the graveyard shift, so I'll try and make this as interesting as possible. There hasn't been much participation so far, and I find it is more interesting if people comment as I go. So please, if you have comments or questions, feel free to raise them immediately. There's been obviously quite a lot of discussion. I haven't been here the whole day, but on BEPS. And I must say I grapple with BEPS because a whole lot of it I think is really hot air. But amongst all the hot air, there are some nuggets of really important stuff. And the challenge for us as practitioners is actually finding those nuggets, because those are the things that are potentially going to affect us going forward. One of the things is documentation and electronic goods and services. And so hidden in all the hot air is some stuff that we do need to deal with. In practice, I'm dealing with two of the topics which really are things we deal with every day, and they're both highly relevant to BEPS. The one is limited risk distributors. South Africa very often is the recipient of LRD type of structures, and we as advisors often get reassuring comments from our foreign colleagues, either Deloitte colleagues or other advisors who've advised the client, saying the structure is absolutely fine and it works. And sometimes it does, but quite often it doesn't. It doesn't work because of specific facts of the South African entity. And you leap into these structures at your peril. So I'm going to try and give you a feel for when LRDs are actually viable and when they're not, because of specific facts applicable in South Africa, and also specific challenges that you face in the South African environment in trying to implement these structures. And the second thing I'll be looking at is probably the sexiest BEPS topic, and that's intellectual property. Again, I'm going to try and make this as practical as possible. Intellectual property is hot news. It's not new. The biggest settlement in the history of the IRS, as far as I'm aware, it still is an intellectual property matter, and involved a settlement of several billion US. So it is an area that requires considerable attention. But again, in South Africa, it has a particular flavor. Just looking at limited risk distributorships, I'll be looking briefly at how they work, considering where they work best, where are they viable, where can you actually have them, where might they not work. And that, I think, is something I've learned by multiple assignments of looking at these things. And that is where the ongoing BEPS debate is actually quite relevant. The issue of substance, conversion issues, something that we also sometimes overlook. It's difficult sometimes to put a peg on the kind of value that's involved and whether there is actually a CGT exit charge. But the numbers can be very big if you get it wrong, so I'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, and this is relevant to both topics, the impact of ex-con in South Africa. So what are limited risk distributorships? Typically what it means is that you have a distribution entity in South Africa. Sorry, is there a question there? Just question or just stretching? Okay. This is like being an auctioneer. So you typically have, let's take the example of a South African entity with a foreign head office which sells it goods. It doesn't have to be goods, it can be other things, but it's most often goods. And essentially it means that the profit and loss potential of that entity is capped. So basically the pricing of the sale of goods to that entity is set in such a way as to enable it to earn a specific target operating margin or an operating margin within a defined range. So essentially that means that the entity is more of a service provider actually than a buy-sell entity. It does formally buy-sell, but actually it's more of a service provider. It's doing marketing services, client liaison, storage, warehousing, inventory management, etc. And that's often how these things are benchmarked. So economically what this means is really that the price of the intragroup services sometimes is built into the pricing of the goods. And it's a strategy which you do see into Africa sometimes as a way of getting around withholding taxes. So again, the validity and justifiable nature of that strategy is very important. It's something it's very closely linked to BEPS because it leads to base erosion and profit shifting. Basically, it means that the LRD earns a capped profit and the residual profits are earned in a central location which might or might not